But Joel has an interesting bio. He is a graduate of West Point. He's got some educational stuff from Harvard. I don't know, Joel, are you going to talk about where you were on September 11th as part of your talk? Well, he was well, he's at the Pentagon, what, 5 offices away? I remember your talk from the impact on September 11th, and shortly thereafter, found himself in the Oval Office having a discussion with the president, and ultimately became the Deputy Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor and the chairman of the Homeland Security Council. So I've said this to you on the phone, and I mean it with all sincerity. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your contribution. I know you've taken that experience and you're trying to turn it into something different. So please welcome Joel Bagnal.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate your infinite wisdom in putting me between this group and happy hour. So we've got.
Some are already drinking.
Are we more secure today than we were 12 years ago? Any thoughts? Come on, we have tier 1 organizations that have chief information security officers with staffs of people with eyes on glass looking at alerts and malware indices and indicators of compromise. And we have 12 years ago, cybersecurity wasn't even a term of art. It was information security, information warfare, information operations, computer network operations, all kinds of different information assurance. But now we've had this ubiquitous term called cybersecurity. We have about 1,000 companies 12 years ago focused on cybersecurity solutions. Now globally, there's over 12,500. Most mid-sized businesses now, they can't afford all the fancy tools that we put together to help us identify threats to our networks like intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, security event information management systems, unified threat management platforms, and the list goes on and on. We're spending millions of dollars in intelligence fees to help us appreciate the emerging threats on the horizon. Medium-sized businesses are becoming comfortable with managed security service providers now as their cybersecurity outsourced provider, taking care of a group of experts that takes care of their network for them. Surely we're more secure today. We've learned a lot of lessons from the hacks that have happened. So, by a raise of hands, with that as the little bit of leading the witness, how many people think we're more secure today than we were 12 years ago in cyberspace? You took the bait. Thank you. One person. That's awesome. 12 years ago, 100 companies per year were affected by some sort of cyber incident. Today, virtually every single company that exists is affected by some sort of cyber incident or some sort of malicious behavior in their network. 1 in 1,000 people 12 years ago was affected by some sort of cyber incident. Now it's almost 1 in 2. 12 years ago, a computer warfare unit of the Chinese military hacked into the defense industrial base of the United States and compromised the avionics, secure engineering, and communications designs of the Joint Strike Fighter, a $168 billion Air Force aircraft for the United States Air Force. And before the US military realized it, the Chinese warfare unit had been in the network for 6 months doing detailed reconnaissance, and they were able to pull off the exact files they wanted at a level of data stream that was below the normal alert schemes. And they were able to encrypt that data at a level of encryption that took an NSA blue team over 2 months to decrypt, National Security Agency blue team. And they were able to leave behind autonomic signals to dial back at will. That was a nation-state attack, one of the most sophisticated attacks ever seen at that time. And now they're a little bit more common. Not as publicized, but a little bit more common. And the scary thing is, and we're not supposed to be scary, we're not supposed to be putting a whole bunch of scary and threat information out there to get people scared into security, but the scary thing is that now the tools that were used by nation-state actors 12 years ago are now available to everyday hackers. The malicious tools that used to be available to only nation-state actors can now be downloaded online. You can get into darknet exploitation sites and download tools, and you can make yourself a self-trained garden variety hacker with strategic capabilities almost overnight. So the 4 elements of security we're going to talk about just a little bit today. In order to have a proper security program, hardware security. Not a whole lot of talk about that these days. Software security, obviously, and firmware security. Thirdly, data security, and fourth, people security. And in particular, when we're talking about people security, we're talking about identifying, verifying, and matching the identity of the human to the file or the device, and also the behaviors of the human. Are the behaviors secure? Are we exercising operational security behaviors? Are we looking at an email from somebody that we think we know, and we just automatically click on that attachment? I mean, just simple things like that in terms of personal security behaviors. So in the view of, and in the context of connected things, we're going to talk about those 4 security parameters. The Ukraine has been a cyber proving ground for the Russian Federation since 2015 for geopolitical reasons and for strategic considerations of the Russian government. In 2015, the Ukraine was hacked by Russia, and it's the first known attack, successful attack on a utility, on a power utility. 20% of the total electric power capability of the nation of Ukraine and 20% of its population were without power for 6 hours. Very successful attack, social engineered through spear phishing, through email, and then it took down not only the power, 20% of the power grid, but caused physical damage through the SCADA systems, and then they were able to make the attack more complicated by then using second and third order effects to challenge the recovery and the mitigation of that attack. Taking down the call center so people couldn't figure out how to call in or couldn't get a human on the phone to call in to figure out how to restore their electricity and when they would have their electricity restored. So why is this relevant? Well, it happens to be that that sophisticated nation-state attack that I talked about a little while ago from China and the availability of the tools now, as it turns out, the Director of National Intelligence has claimed for the United States and the global intelligence community more broadly has claimed this year that industrial control systems associated with critical infrastructure is the #1 threat vector in the world. So water treatment plants. Think about what just a slight modulation in the valves and pumping systems of water treatment plants would cause in terms of loss of life and threat to life. Power, energy, writ large, everything from upstream operations to oil and gas, liquid natural gas, liquid natural petroleum, all types of critical infrastructure where we've taken legacy systems now, attached an IP address to it or a sensor to it, and brought it online. We are now very, very vulnerable. And all the vulnerabilities associated with those legacy systems that don't have patches, they don't have software updates, they haven't been serviced from a development perspective in years, are now online and available to garden variety hackers to take advantage of it. So there's this company called MITRE. Y'all are familiar with it. They're the ones responsible for tracking the number of vulnerabilities and the number of exposures that happen every year. As of right now, there's about 114,000 or so CVEs, known vulnerabilities, in the world. And so for each of those vulnerabilities, there are exploits. There are ways to get in, use that vulnerability, and then get into the system, the network, the communications capability associated with that vulnerability. And then for every exploit, there are hundreds, if not thousands, and now it is reported by RAND that there's over 100,000 new malware variants being developed per day against those exploits. And most of the cybersecurity tools that are available to enterprises today are kind of focused on the outer layer there. They're focused on finding the malicious behavior, finding that virus, finding that malicious code. And that's fine and well, and it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of tools out there that do that. But what we need to be doing is we need to be focused more on the vulnerabilities. And so for the known vulnerabilities, the ones we know about, there are mitigation plans. There are ways to patch those vulnerabilities. And just for common good sense and health of your network and security protocols, you would think that you'd want to keep patching and making sure that you have your security protocols set right. But it turns out that 90% of the successful cyber attacks that occur today are occurring against unpatched known vulnerabilities. That's just bad behavior. And then there's this huge challenge that's even exacerbated now by connected things, if you will. If we bring all these legacy systems online and attach IP addresses to them, we've just expanded, and now the vulnerabilities associated with hardware, firmware, and software is growing exponentially as we continue to grow converged platforms. So now we've got a pretty big problem on our hand. And you associate this challenge with the number of qualified, trained, skilled cybersecurity professionals that can help companies deal with this problem. There's over 1.2 million job shortages in the United States alone today associated with cybersecurity. Big challenge. So we have a quad chart. I recognize where I am. I felt it was important to put one up here on the screen. But the point here is that we have, in the past 12 months, and you all answered the question correctly, we've had more investment, both in terms of merger and acquisition, capital outlay, R&D. There's been more capital deployed in the past 12 months for cybersecurity than in computing history. It is also true that in the past 12 months, we've had more hacks, more successful hacks than in computing history. 6.2 billion records exposed over the past 12 months. It's a huge challenge. So are we solving the security problem? Not at all. Here's one of the reasons why. Of the 1,500 emerging software security companies in the US today, I'm talking A, B, and C round companies that focus on a particular solution for cybersecurity. It's software-based. It is attaching itself to layer 3 and above in the network, and it's focused on mostly analysis, alerts, identifying those indicators of compromise, those malicious behaviors. Less than 5% of the security solutions are focused on layers 1 and 2. And so we have drank the Kool-Aid, as they say, on software, big time, for lots of very good reasons. But a proper security program is going to be inclusive of hardware and attach itself to the infrastructure, the foundation of our networks. It's critical, and we're not doing enough of that. And so when we think about how we deploy our networks and how we design and deploy our networks, we have to have hardware security as a component of our design and our implementation. So 12 years ago, again, about 1 in 100 companies. Now the Norse map is showing almost a barrage, especially focused on commercial entities in the United States. The director of the FBI and the director of national intelligence and the Secretary of Homeland Security did a conference on Capitol Hill in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee 2 weeks ago and claimed that cybersecurity now is the #1 threat to our national security, more so than counterterrorism and the exploitation, not against national security systems of the United States, but against the fundamental structure and strength of our economic base. Because commercial entities are losing intellectual property, trade secrets, shores of funds every single day. It's a death of 1,000 cuts, and it's leaving the shores of the United States and going elsewhere. And that is the challenge that's before us. So there's no doubt that there's tremendous value in Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things. There's no doubt that we have reached almost a capacity for the age of information. In the next 5 years, we are going to lean into the age of experience and enlightenment. Some of the futurists out there are even calling this the new Renaissance. It's amazing what's happening. The value that we're gaining from the connected things world is wonderful. But we have not kept pace with security innovation. And we are going to experience a catastrophic challenge before us if we don't do something about it. We need to focus on prevention as opposed to just focusing on response. The chart that I showed a little while ago about the software security solutions that are in the market today, of the 1,500 companies that are in the A through C rounds of their investment history, that are achieved market penetration, they're selling their wares, their security wares, it's only incremental improvement in security. It's not a comprehensive improvement in security. And they're software-based. And they're reactive, they're responsive in nature. The bad thing has already happened to your network. The actor has already in there. Whether you've actually been exploited or not is a different matter. The malicious code, the bad behavior, the problem is resident in your network. And so, what are we going to do about it? We're going to redesign our network and recapitalize our entire IT infrastructure? Not likely. But there is a way to solve this challenge by taking a layered defense approach and securing those critical data streams and using hardware root of trust and encryption and key management schemes in order to better secure your network and do it in a way that you can leave the design in place and leave the utility and the operational efficiency of your network in place. And secure your financial risk, your production risk, infrastructure risk, and lessen the loss of life. Nobody's network looks like this, but this one does. And so, again, if you think about a typical industrial control network and all that goes into connecting devices and disparate information systems into a production network, there are key junctures of communication where a simple hardware dongle or a hardware device that can be placed there that will secure the connection between your device and the information technology network that you're connecting to. Again, critical infrastructure risk is growing exponentially. We anticipate that there will be more near catastrophic events that take place in 2019 associated with energy, healthcare, and financial services industries in this country. Life-enhancing convenience, absolutely. But the connected things environment is also creating the security challenge that is likened to a botnet army. Because you take advantage of one security vulnerability, and you can do that and replicate it very, very quickly, then you've created a mass disruption and a very big challenge. So there's two quick examples we'll go through, but I'm running out of time. So I think y'all are familiar with, I chose Saudi Aramco and then the Las Vegas casino, the fish tank temperature sensor that was successfully hacked into by a 17-year-old and ended up stealing data that went into a cloud system in Finland and exposed all the top 1,000 high rollers that frequent Las Vegas on an annual basis and their accounts. This is a well-known system. It's one of the most successful SCADA attacks that took place, and to date now about $1.2 billion in affected revenue associated with Saudi Aramco. So the landscape has changed. We are definitely less secure today than we were 12 years ago. There are protocols that we need to enact in our networks and in our businesses in order to effect a layered defense and a more appropriate security scheme. And the culture of security is critically important. We've got to convince leadership as well as organizational and functional leaders to take on security as part of the imperative culture that exists in our companies. Lastly, the democratization of tools associated with the availability of very sophisticated attack schemes, techniques, tactics, and procedures, with the result of the WikiLeaks from NSA and the ability to go into the darknet now and download Metasploit modules and Python hacking modules that allow us to conduct strategic activities in cybersecurity. So what do we need to do? Well, I'm not sure that firewalls and behavioral analysis, even though with the onset of machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to certainly incrementally improve cybersecurity, but it's still, and having the right policies in place and fixing those is not enough. We have to have a prevention-based security program. And the tools now, there's not to be innovation and technology associated with prevention. We have it in the national security space. There is no reason why we cannot commercialize those capabilities and make it available to commercial entities. So last slide, a layered defense with a hardware-rooted trust, identity-rooted trust where you can verify mutual authenticated individuals to your computer networks and your devices, isolate and contain your critical data using enclaves, mitigate your internal threats, use all those tools in conjunction with each other, and then prepare for the hack in the event that you do have a challenge. You want to be ready from a crisis communications and a risk and reputational and business loss perspective to handle the attack. With that, I'll turn it over to Mark or any questions y'all may have.
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it
Like
seems,
he wasn't?
yeah, no, I was almost depressed after that until I realized advances in quantum computing render almost all of what you're talking about completely obsolete, and there will be a transitional phase that I think renders everything we know to be secure completely moot. So how are you advising governments and corporations to protect against that? Because it seems like keeping the critical infrastructure off the network and literally behind locked doors is the only solution, at least during that transition.
It's a great question, and there's been an awful lot of debate and in the public policy arena right now about quantum resistant security, and I think it's the wrong approach. I really do. I'm just not for it. You know, we got to step into it again, thinking prevention and thinking about being on the offensive associated with the wonderful onset of what's going to happen when quantum computing becomes a reality. I think we ought to have quantum-enabled security. Think about it from the different perspective. What about quantum-enabled encryption? Can you think about that? I mean, how incredible would that be? So I think we got to change our mindset about how we're even stepping into this challenge.
And I think you're right, but then there's that transition away from, you know, the current SSL and all the stuff that we do now and how that would work, you know, when a nation state gains control over quantum computing.
I completely agree, and it's a challenge that there's something that's taking place right now at the White House that has interagency and intergovernmental and private sector support. But it's called the Moonshot Initiative. If you all have read about it, it's widely available online right now, and I expect the White House to be releasing the report here pretty soon. A lot of wonderful companies like Dell and others are involved in the Moonshot Initiative, but what we've recognized is that one of the major investment areas that this country needs to take on, because we're behind in quantum computing innovation and research and development. We're probably number 3 right now on the world stage, and so we've got to do a better job of that. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. Yeah, right there.
Hi. I had a quick question about, you were talking about being less secure over time, and that we have more and more companies with more and more advanced security teams and chief security officers and so on. I'm wondering if there's a correlation between the companies that spend a lot of money on their security infrastructure and companies that have all the bells and whistles that you see at an RSA show, and a decrease in issues, or actually if there's no correlation to that at all.
There is. Tier 1 enterprises are generally more secure than small to medium-sized businesses. It's a fact. They have the resources to be able to put an awful lot of G&A or overhead associated, you know, with the cyber challenge, with the security challenge, and they're also more attacked every day. You know, if you look at the alert and the mitigation rates of large companies compared to medium small companies, it's enormous. But they're generally more secure. They've got more resources against the problem, and that's the reason why. There's something we need to be really concerned about, though, and it goes back to the point I raised about cybersecurity now being the #1 national security threat, and that is that most of the innovation, though, in this country, as you well understand, doesn't take place in the larger companies. It takes place in the smaller companies that are less secure. And so when larger companies, this isn't always the case, and it's a very general statement, but when larger companies want to truly do something that is out of the box, or they want to innovate in a particular area where they haven't had innovation before, or they want to take on a new market penetration challenge, for the most part, the behaviors have been, they will acquire their way into those new market areas, as opposed to develop their way into the new market areas. And the way they do that is they buy smaller companies. And so the intellectual property and the trade secrets and the development techniques and tools and procedures that are being developed in smaller companies, that's a huge threat to our economy and our economic base. So there is a correlation. Thank you.
Do you have a view on things made in China by any chance?
You asked me that on the podcast. I was hoping to avoid that today.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just teasing. There is a U.S. view right now, which is one of grave concern. You see it represented in the tariffs/trade negotiations that are going on with China right now. And one of the largest sticks that we're holding out to achieve some progress on, it's not just about tariffs. It's about the cybersecurity behavior of China toward the U.S. And there is just an enormous amount of bad activity that's against our corporations that both operate in China as well as here, and we've got to get a handle on that. And so we've done some things like, from a competitive perspective and also from a exploitation protection perspective, we've done things like ban Huawei and put some significant restrictions on ZTE and other Chinese companies that have capabilities here. Whether that has an impact or not, we have yet to see. But we need to get standard cybersecurity behaviors across the globe. And right now, we're the biggest target, and we're the ones that are suffering most from that malicious behavior.
So we have a question right here.
What advice would you give to startups who don't have a ton of funding, specifically in hardware and software?
There are a few companies out there right now that provide both product and service designed for the affordability of startups. That it's a fractional type of relationship, but from a consulting or fee-for-service type of arrangement, you can get an awful lot of good advice and shared product to help you with your infrastructure, with your security needs at an affordable rate. It's a growing area of cybersecurity service companies, but if you want to talk offline specifically about some of those ideas, I'm happy to share those with you.
Yeah, and we're going to have another question, but that's an important note. So after we wrap this up in a few minutes, we're all going to go into a networking session. People like Bill and Joel are here and are eager to speak with you, as long as they have their glass of wine or beverage of choice. So I'd encourage you to come up and make sure that you're meeting everybody that you need to meet and speaking to everybody you need to speak to. So we have a question, I think it's right here.
Looking at a lot of the examples that you've pulled for your presentation, I keep seeing the word spear phishing popping up again and again. And not to be fatalistic, but my understanding is that spear phishing is a euphemism for someone with security credentials getting tricked. And to that effect, is there actually any way really to protect against that sort of attack from a motivated aggressor?
There are some super cool new counter social engineering technologies that are being developed right now that are based specifically on human behaviors. There's even one right now, that's not one, I'm sure there's more than one, but there's one that I'm aware of that keystrokes, file access, time on the computer a day based upon your work profile are all being used as part of the analytical basis for, is that person going into the right file structure and making the right decisions from a keystroke perspective. Very interesting. So there are some technology tools that are being developed that are going to help with spear phishing. So the answer is yes. More importantly, though, we got to deal with just good security practices, operational behavior. We are inherently stupid sometimes as humans. We're going to make mistakes. we've got to do a better job of security as a culture. And then the training piece of that is going to make much more strides than technology will.
Hi, maybe this is a good
Say the word
question.
bumblebee, please.
What?
Say bumblebee as part of your question.
Bumblebee, bumblebee,
Okay.
bumblebee. That's a great donation. Just as
She's going to pay a lot
as
of
we
money.
as we leave
I'm doing it.
the takeaways today, what do you personally do? I remember listening to a financial person who said in security who said, I never do online banking. Do you have personal
good question.
practices and advice that now you share with others?
No, because I take advantage of every efficiency out there for productivity and for online banking. Yeah, of course I have personal security practices. Just one simple thing that I do, but anybody here familiar with the YubiKey? Good. It does help. It's just simple little USB token you put in your computer. It's got a 27 key password lockdown for your computer as well as for any device that you have. You can use it for your smartphone so very important little things like that. But I've got a whole bunch of like personal security practices that I don't use the Wi-Fi in this building, for example.
Come on now. The Media Lab, for crying out loud. How bad could it be? Right, Ken? I would say so. So I think we've probably gotten all of our questions. I want to not only thank you, but I want to commend you for having two 2x2 matrices and one stack slide. So that was very impressive. But let's give Joel a big hand.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.